Good afternoon and welcome to Lunch Break Live with Tea Party Patriots Action. I'm Bill Pasco, Tea Party Patriots man in Washington, and I'll be delivering both the call to action and the Washington Report. Let's get right to it. It's Monday, October 27. The House has been out of session since its last vote on September 19th, 38 days ago. The House will be out of session this week on the same 48-hour notice it's been on since September 22nd. The Senate will return today and will stay in session through Thursday. Last week in the Senate came back on Monday and failed to end debate on the motion to proceed to H.R. 5371. That's the House-passed continuing resolution. That was the 11th time Senate Democrats have blocked that CR. On Tuesday, the Senate voted to end debate on the nominations of Ann Lee Gaylord Moe to serve as a U.S. District Judge for the Middle District of Florida, and William W. Mercer to serve as a U.S. District Judge for the District of Montana, and then voted to confirm Moe to that judgeship. On Wednesday, the Senate failed again to end debate on the motion to proceed to H.R. 5371, the House-passed continuing resolution. That was the 12th time Senate Democrats have blocked that CR. Then the Senate voted to end debate on the nominations of Bill Lewis to serve as a U.S. District Judge for the Middle District of Alabama and Chad Meredith to serve as a U.S. District Judge for the Eastern District of Kentucky, and then to confirm Mercer to that judgeship. On Thursday, by a vote of 54 to 45, the Senate failed to end debate on a motion to proceed to S3012. A bill to appropriate funds for pay and allowances of accepted federal employees for periods of work performed during a lapse in appropriations. That's fancy language. In other words, the Democrats filibustered a bill to provide pay for federal employees who were being required to work even though they weren't being paid. Then the Senate voted to confirm the nomination of Chad Meredith to serve as a U.S. District Judge for the Eastern District of Kentucky. And then the Senate voted to end debate on the nomination of Rebecca L. Tableson to serve as a U.S. Circuit Judge for the Seventh Circuit Court of Appeals. And then they were done. This week in the Senate will return today with the first vote set for 5:30 p.m. At that time, the Senate will vote on confirmation of Executive Calendar number 471, Rebecca L. Tableson, to serve as a U.S. Circuit Judge for the Seventh Circuit Court of Appeals. Following disposition of the nomination, the Senate will vote on confirmation of Executive Calendar number 458, Bill Lewis, to serve as a U.S. District Judge for the Middle District of Alabama. Then, based on the Majority Leader's cloture filings, I anticipate we'll see votes on the nominations of Jordan Emery Pratt to serve as U.S. District Judge for the Middle District of Florida, and Edmund G. LaCour, Jr. to serve as U.S. District Judge for the Northern District of Alabama. Now to government spending, deal or no deal, week 4. It's Monday, October 27, day 27 of what is now the second longest shutdown in the history of the United States government. And that is plenty long enough for the American Federation of Government Employees, the largest union representing government employees. In a statement released at 3 a.m. this morning, AFGE President Everett Kelly wrote, quote, "Both political parties have made their point, and still there is no clear end in sight. It's time to pass a clean continuing resolution and end this shutdown today. No half measures and no gamesmanship," end quote. For those of you keeping score at home, passing a clean continuing resolution is the Republican position in the stalled negotiations. A key member of the base of the Democratic Party just abandoned Chuck Schumer's strategy and demanded that both sides adopt the GOP position. Government workers' unions like AFGE and ASKME and NTEU are the only unions that are coming close to holding their own these days. Private sector unions have been shrinking for years, to the point where within a few years, the majority of unionized workers in this country will be government workers. I want to take just a moment to put this in perspective for you. There are about 122.6 million private sector workers in this country. About 7.2 million of them are members of unions. That represents about 5.9% of the private sector workforce. So about 1 in 17 private sector workers is a member of a union. There are about 21.7 million government workers in this country. About 7 million of them are members of unions. That represents a little more than 32% of the public sector workforce. So about 1 in 3 public sector workers is a member of a union. Compare those numbers to 25 years ago at the turn of the millennium. In 2000, there were about 99.3 million workers in the private sector. About 8.4 million of them were members of a union, representing about 8.4% of the workforce. So about 1 in 12 private sector laborers was a member of a union. That same year, there were about 18.4 million government workers and 7.1 million were members of a union. That represents about 37.5% of the workforce. And it meant that a little more than 1 in 3 public sector workers was a member of a union. So, over the past 25 years, government workers have pretty much maintained their hold on the government workforce. But private sector unions have lost ground significantly. You can see why government employee unions are so important to the Democrat Party. And that's why this statement from the head of the largest government workers union in the country, clearly supporting the Republicans' position on the shutdown, is so important. Now, one problem with this approach is that we've now whittled down the negotiating period in the original Clean CR. When that bill was passed in the House at the end of September, it called for funding the government at its current levels through November 21, giving the leaders and the appropriators about 7 weeks to finish their work. That's because the appropriators told the leaders, as they were constructing the CR, how much time they thought they would need to finish the negotiations over the spending bills. Well, we're now 4 weeks into that 7-week breathing space. Even if they pass the CR today, the appropriators and the leaders would only have about 3 weeks to do what they said was 7 weeks worth of work. So maybe they need to come back and pass a new CR. And this time, if they do, I'll lay odds they will time it to end the funding on the Friday before Christmas. That would be Friday, December 19, to add to the pressure on any lawmaker who might not like the spending package they negotiate. Vote for it, or be the guy who kept his colleagues from going home for Christmas. I sure hope this shutdown ends soon so we can stop this growing chatter about carving out an exception in the filibuster in the Senate to allow for movement of an appropriations bill without need for 60 votes to end debate on a motion to proceed. That would be calamitous, an outcome that would essentially turn the Senate into a smaller version of the House. Stay tuned. Now to the latest on Russia and Ukraine. On Tuesday, President Trump said a Ukraine summit with Russian dictator Vladimir Putin, which Trump had just a week earlier announced to take place in Budapest in the near future, would be what he called a waste of time. And with that, he dismissed the idea. Wednesday, the Trump administration took its toughest actions yet against Moscow when it announced new sanctions against Russia's 2 largest state-owned oil firms. Meanwhile, in Europe, in a coordinated maneuver, about $200 billion worth of frozen Russian assets are about to be used as collateral for a big loan from the EU to Ukraine. It appears the Trump administration is coming around to the view that Putin will only stop waging war against Ukraine when he concludes that there is no prospect of victory for Russia. Now to the Jenny Beth Show. On Wednesday, episode 144 of the Jenny Beth Show dropped, featuring Jenny Beth's conversation with law professor and constitutional scholar John Eastman. The two discussed the law, the Constitution, Eastman's experience on more than 200 constitutional cases of one form or another, and his own ongoing prosecutions. The conversation becomes so intense and detailed that it's been split into 2 episodes, and this is part 1. As always, highly recommended. And that's our Washington Report for this week. Now to the call to action. Call Senate Democrats and tell them you oppose a government shutdown and you support passage of a clean funding resolution, a clean CR. Democrats are demanding more than $1 trillion in additional funding, and they want it added to this short-term, temporary funding resolution. That's just outrageous. All we're trying to do now is get the government reopened at current funding levels. Democrats should not be keeping the government shut down because they didn't get what they want. That's just wrong. So please, call Senate Democrats and let them know you support a clean funding resolution, a clean CR. And then call both Speaker Johnson and Majority Leader Thune and thank them for holding firm. There's an awful lot of pressure on them to cave, and they are to be thanked for standing strong against that pressure. Well, that's our broadcast for this week. We'll see you next week, same place, same time. Until then, be well and be active.